Welcome to my digital presentation for Mathematics Curriculum Engaging Students in Learning Mathematics. Through this presentation, I will discuss the barriers or misconceptions to learning the mathematical concept in Year 4, mapping, and through introducing you to some resources that will help overcome the barriers. So first I'll look at the content descriptor. Use simple scales, legends, and directions to interpret information contained in basic maps. Identifying the scale used on maps of cities in rural areas in Australia and inner city in Indonesia and describing the difference, and using directions to find features on a map. So when I started this project, I looked at the sequence of content. So I knew that in Year 3, students have or should have created and interpreted simple grid maps to show position and pathways. So in Year 4, this is our content descriptor. Use simple scales, legends, and directions to interpret information contained in basic maps. I also looked at other relevant content descriptors. So from Year 3 HAS Geography, students should have used geographical tools, such as maps, to locate and name significant places, and identified and described major national features of Australia and described them with annotations on a map, and used a globe to locate the Pacific Island nations, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, and countries relevant to students, labeling them on a map and identifying the direction of each country from Australia. So it's good to know. Right, so the barrier and misconception, the mathematical concept is mapping, and the barrier to mapping I've selected is developing spatial thinking skills and language, such as visualizing, interpreting, and reasoning using location, place, distance, direction, relationships, movement, and change in space in the digital age. So while many skills have become obsolete in the digital age, map reading remains an important tool for building children's spatial reasoning skills and helping them make sense of our world. So this table I adapted from Map It with Young Children from the National Geographic Education. It looks at some spatial concepts and the student conceptual understanding and possible student misconceptions. So ones that stood out to me were, for the spatial concept, distance and direction, struggling to know which way to hold a map and getting easily confused if it is not aligned with the real world. So that makes sense when we rely on digital technology such as Google Maps to just show us that we go forward, because the map is already up the right way for us to follow. And if we miss our turn, it will reroute and just automatically turn to the right way up. Another misconception of spatial concept is symbols. So understanding concrete symbols that represent an object or place, and that transition from iconic real-world symbols to abstract symbols. Students may not understand abstract or unrelated symbols, large numbers of symbols, or complexity of symbols. Something that was interesting also, that a map with Australia represented as a pink country might be seen by some students to literally be a pink country. That was quite interesting. So the resources I have selected to overcome or address these barriers. The first resource is interactive story mapping. So I guess the resource is Google Earth, and on Google Earth I created an interactive story map of Geraldton and surrounds. So the story map can be used to explore the features of maps contextually relevant to students in and around Geraldton. So various locations, landmarks, and features are depicted, including Geraldton Grammar School, St Francis Cathedral, Point Moore Lighthouse, HMAS Sydney Memorial, Ellendale Pool, and more. This interactive map can be used to explore spatial thinking concepts and mapping features such as bird's eye view, grids, directional language, location, place, direction, and distance. So using this resource, students can place the features explored on their own map and create directions for their own story map. So this is just a screenshot of the story that I created on Google Earth. We'll go into it. Oh, that's not what I want. So this feature on Google Earth is quite simply plotting locations, and you can add a story to them. So if I present, I started my story at Gelton Grammar School, which is a school in Beresford, Western Australia. So you could, wherever you are, however you're using it, bring the students some context. So this is our school. Can anyone tell me what this might be? It's pointing to the oval. So that would be like, oh, the oval. And then they could say, okay, so from you, which direction is the oval? And you could really immerse them in that language and the interactive features of that. So from Gelton Grammar, I then placed it in, my next plot was Geraldton. So Geraldton is a coastal city in the Midwest region of Australia, 424 kilometres north of the state capital of Perth. So we keep going through. My next plot was the cathedral. The thing about this resource is very immersive and quite captivating. So it's very engaging. So there's Back Beach. One of the features that I really liked is that you can look at it from a 3D or 2D perspective. So this perspective, I have the grid lines, I have the cardinal points, I have the plots. If I click down here, we can look at it in a 3D sort of way where it goes around. You can see the oceans, and it's just, yeah, it's very pretty and immersive. So like I said, you can obviously plot your own story. I didn't go into that much detail for this demonstration, but you definitely could. So you could have a story about the Esplanade and maybe an experience that the students have all had there, like the festival on the weekend had fireworks coming out of here, and you could talk about that and they could see it on a map for that kind of reference. So you could create a story on the map as a teacher, or the students could create a story. You could create a story map of a character's journey. So a character you might be studying, or a book you've read, even a movie. You could plot their journey on the map. You could give this platform to students as a diagnostic assessment and ask them to follow directional language. So plot a location that is south of Geraldton. Okay, now plot a location that is northeast of Geraldton. So you can see if they know the directional language associated with that. And it's not like a test, but you can use it that way. So another cool feature on this resource is this thing called distance. So you could, oh, it's hard to see under my head. Anyway, give students a mathematical investigation as such as where they can find and record the distances between points of interest, such as, say, the Point Moore Lighthouse. How far is that from our school? So from grammar, Point Moore Lighthouse is 4.63 kilometres, and then you could ask them to convert it, so they can convert it on here. So from kilometres to metres, 4,634.42 metres, or even centimetres. Nautical miles, that might be a bit interesting. Yeah, so you could use this as a tool to explore distances and then plot them, for example. You could also use this to make predictions about locations on the map and find them. So kind of like what I said before. So yeah, there's actually quite a lot that you can do with this resource, and it is very engaging and immersive for mathematical learning for all learners and teachers. I did spend a little bit of time on here. Okay, so that's my first resource that addresses the barriers to developing spatial thinking concepts and really immerses students in directional language, location, place, direction, and distance. So my second resource is game-based learning. The instructional game Rainforest Make a Walking Track. This instructional game can be used to consolidate student knowledge for interpreting basic maps using simple scales, legends, and directions in an online game format. This game may also be used as a hook for students to create their own basic map, plotting points, and creating directions for other students to follow. So by playing this instructional game, students are engaged in learning mathematics, and opportunities for students with diverse backgrounds to think mathematically are provided. So this resource addresses barriers to developing spatial thinking skills and language by providing interaction with reference frames or grid systems and an introduction to coordinate system, distance, direction, location, and symbols. So that's just some screenshots, but we'll go into game. So this game is from Education Services Australia, and I found it on Scootle. Here we go. So we're looking at a map. There's the symbols of the locations, the grid references, so A7. We have the compass points, so we can look at lots of directional language, and we have the scale for conversion. So the point of this game is to use your knowledge of compasses to choose the piece of track that will create a path following the clues. So the first clue is my place is at grid reference C7, and the campsite is at grid reference E8 to the southeast. So choose a piece of track that joins these two places. So they will be looking at the grid references and the symbols on the map, then the compass points to work out where southeast is, and it's right there. So it would go southeast, and I would select this. Well done. Yeah. So, and then there's the next clue to keep going. And I guess it just can be used as a hook for lessons, and it can be used to consolidate knowledge. So I would use it as a pre-lesson or like a warm-up into having students create something like this themselves. So after playing this game, they're quite familiar with grid references and locations on the map. They could draw the classroom or the nature playground or somewhere in the school, plot some relevant locations, and then they could create their own directional language to follow the path and give it to other students to complete or to follow. So in that way, like an investigation, and yeah, so this just immerses them in that. So it's quite engaging being an online game. Everything with technology is very engaging for students, we find. So those are my two resources. So in reference to the content descriptor, use simple scales, legends, directions to interpret information contained in basic maps. This resource really does give you a lot there. Scales, legends, and directions. Scales, legends, directions. So identifying the scale used on maps of cities in rural areas in Australia and then city in Indonesia and describing the difference. So we could definitely use thy first resource for that. And using directions to find features on a map, which is exactly what this is asking you to do. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed my digital presentation. I will definitely be using these resources for not only maths, but geography, possibly, because it's very useful. So thank you for watching my presentation, and if you have any questions, then email me. Thanks.